and thanks everyone for attending today. We're going to start with the land acknowledgement. So if I could get the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So this land acknowledgement, recognizes the land that the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness at York University occupies. So the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And I would just encourage all attendees just to really reflect on the land that they currently occupy as well, because we do have folks from across Canada joining us. So next slide, please. So today I'll do a quick introduction of our panelists, and they'll have a bit more time to introduce themselves later. And then we're going to dive into the host homes developmental evaluation findings. And then we're going to have, I think, the most exciting part, which is a Q&A with our host home and night stop providers. And then we're going to save a bit of time for some questions from the audience. So yeah, it should be a jam-packed day, and hopefully a lot of conversations will occur. Next slide, please. All right, so to introduce the folks on the screen right now, so our moderator is Mary J. McKinnon from Away Home Canada. The researchers are myself and Erika Morton, representing the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. And then our panelists, really excited to introduce Sandy Dietrich-Bell from oneROOF Youth Services in Kitchener, Ontario, Bonnie Harkness from 360 Kids in York Region, Ontario, Steve Levac from Bridging the Gap in Halton Region, Ontario, and Russ Sanche from the Portal in Kentville, Nova Scotia. So really excited to have them on today's presentation. And next slide, please. Cool. So this project resulted from funding received from InnoWeave, and Raising the Roof received the funding to conduct this evaluation focused on host homes across Canada. So thank you to InnoWeave for funding the project, and thank you for Raising the Roof for commissioning this project. And Raising the Roof hired Hub Solutions, which is a social enterprise of the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, to conduct this work. So that's where Erika and I kind of jump in. And next slide, please. So the objective of the project was to gain a deeper understanding of the host homes model in Canada. It builds on the previous work of Raising the Roof related to host homes. So there is a link right there. You'll see hosthomes.org. That is access to the Host Homes Toolkit, which provides an overview of the host homes model and consideration for organizations to make when developing a host homes program. So if folks want to check that out during the call or afterwards, it really has a wealth of information about the host homes model and how it can be operated in the Canadian context. Great, and next slide.
Okay, so I'll take us through some of the evaluation questions just so you get a sense of what we were exploring with this project. So there was initially 3 evaluation questions, oh, thanks, Lindsay, that were co-created by the COH and Raising the Roof. And those 3 were what you see here. Number 1, how can the host homes model be adapted to meet the the needs of diverse Canadian contexts? Number 2, how can partnerships be utilized to create opportunities for scaling the host homes model across Canada? And number 3, how can Raising the Roof support agencies in developing and implementing host homes programs? Next slide, please, Lindsay. From those initial 3, there we go, there was another 3 evaluation questions that were developed through some further consultation. And you see them here. Those are how do host homes programs fit within the Housing First for Youth framework? Number 2, how do host homes programs fit within sort of the broader system's response to youth homelessness? And number 3, what are the training and technical assistance needs that are required to scale up host homes programs across Canada? I'll hand it over back to you, John.
Great, thanks, Erika. And on the next slide, we'll demonstrate kind of what we did to answer these questions. So it was a pretty comprehensive approach. We conducted a literature review and a document review of existing literature on host homes programs, as well as program manuals, those kind of pieces. We did a national survey to kind of gauge the interest of the host homes model across Canada among youth serving organizations. We did interviews with host home providers, so some of the folks that you're seeing on the webinar right now contributed to this work, as well as consultations with our host homes working group. So the host homes working group included national representation of host home providers. And yeah, it was a really good opportunity to connect folks with one another from across the country. I think we had about 10 people at one point, which was great, and really just kind of sharing kind of best practices and just sharing learnings that can be that people have had through their experience operating host home programs. So really thank you to the host homes working group for contributing to this project. And now to jump into the findings. These are very high levels, so we do have the executive summary of the report available on the Homeless Hub, so please feel free to check that out. But yeah, one of the first findings was that the host homes model requires some refinement of the definition. So a consistent theme throughout the evaluation was the need to clearly define the host homes model. In its most basic form, a host homes offers young people a safe space where they can either stay with an adult that they may not have previously known, so a member of the community, or a trusted family member or friend. Host homes can be considered an early intervention that acts as an alternative to emergency shelters. Host homes programs provide young people with locally based support, which is really important since emergency shelters for young people don't exist in every community, especially those that are smaller or located in rural areas. And we did find some differences in host homes programs, including the target group of the model, such as the age of young people and the level of supports that they may need, the length of the program, so some may be shorter term, some may be longer term, the types of supports that are offered, and the role of a young person's family in the program. And I will say there's also differences between the host homes model and the Night Stop model, which Bonnie will speak about a bit later. And lastly, we heard that the distinction between staying with an unknown host provider compared to a trusted family member or friend is an important consideration for host home programs to make and really warrants further investigation. Great, so next slide, please. We also heard that consultations must occur with Indigenous communities to examine if the host home model is culturally safe for Indigenous young people. Although briefly touched upon during the interviews, further examination is required on the role of host home programs in relation to Canada's history of colonization. This includes the legacy of the residential school system and the 60s and millennium scoop. Host home programs may inflict harm and trauma among young Indigenous participants if these young people are placed in non-Indigenous housing. Therefore, consultations with Indigenous organizations are required to determine if this kind of model is a good fit for Indigenous youth in the community. It's also important for host home programs to recognize that Indigenous homelessness extends beyond just that lack of physical housing and encompasses 12 different dimensions as proposed by Jesse Thistle in 2017. So the host homes model must address the multifaceted impact of homelessness on Indigenous communities. And off to Erika.
Great, thanks John for getting us started on the findings. Lindsay, do you want to head to the next slide? Great, there's 3 slides of findings left and then we're getting to the main event, so bear with me folks. So carrying on with the findings, so another finding was the need to differentiate the host homes model from foster care. And certainly at times the two can sound somewhat similar, but there's certainly key elements that do differentiate the two from each other. One being that the goal of the host homes model is really for young people to either safely return to live with their family wherever possible, or alternatively to find independent housing. And so ideally this means the host homes worker is really supporting the young person with their sort of identified housing goals, as well as other goals the youth might identify. And then secondly, the host homes program really is about promoting independence or sort of interdependence as opposed to dependence. So thinking about, again, sort of what supports or goals they want to work on while they're with the program. So it's really important to kind of keep this messaging in mind when talking about the host homes model, so that there's clarity sort of around how it differentiates from foster care. Next slide, please, Lindsay. Great. So other finding, the host homes model should operate from a housing first for youth service philosophy and really focusing on youth choice, youth voice sort of being paramount. And, you know, a key element of the host homes model is really working with young people, as we've already articulated, to identify the goals they want to work on while they're in the program and ideally achieve. And so this means then that the host homes programs need to really be operating from a youth-centered approach, which certainly aligns with the Housing First for Youth model. And furthermore, focusing on that positive youth development, that strengths-based orientation as well. And so ideally, service provision within the host home model should be further defined to incorporate these all the Housing First for Youth service principles. And then another finding on the same slide here is that host home programs need to recognize the diversity of young people who could benefit the program, as well as developing a diversity of host home providers. So a potential strength of the host home program is the ability to recruit host providers that reflect the diversity of the young people accessing the program. So this might include recruiting folks from Black, Indigenous, persons of color communities, as well as 2S LGBTQ communities and geographically diverse communities. So a mix of rural, urban, suburban, etc. And so, you know, the benefit and the purpose of having a diverse number of host providers is so that young people, you know, thinking back to that housing first philosophy, youth voice, youth choice, youth have a choice of who they get to stay with. And ideally, it's a home that reflects their culture and values and is where they're going to feel safe and comfortable and welcome. So the recruitment process then is quite important to be thinking about making sure there's no barriers that might prevent folks from diverse backgrounds from being recruited. And our next slide, Lindsay. Great. So 2 more findings. So one of those is that the host homes program requires a significant number of partnerships to be successful. And I think in some of the interviews that I was involved in, we certainly heard about how community embedded host homes programs really do need to be, and the need to have several different partnerships in the community. And, you know, for a variety of reasons, these partnerships are certainly important for referrals to the program, particularly among sort of the education system, the child welfare system, and the justice system. But certainly not only those partners, but also partners are really important in terms of the actual service provision. So once young people are a part of the program, making sure they're getting connected with supports like social assistance, mental health, et cetera, as well. What sort of is kind of perhaps missing based on some of the work that that we were foraying into is partnerships to support young people sort of exiting the program. So thinking about perhaps, you know, how folks are engaging with landlords in their community for youth that are sort of going into independent housing. So yeah, so overall, just because of, you know, the purpose of the program is supporting youth goals and the diversity of those goals that youth might be working towards, you know, numerous partnerships are certainly needed. And last but certainly not least, last finding is that host homes program also fits within sort of an early intervention approach. And I think, John, you sort of talked a little bit about the early intervention aspect of host homes, but fitting within a coordinated access system. And there's sort of two ways that can have a purpose. So number one is host homes can support the triage process. So for young people who might be, you know, possibly entering into the system, we can actually possibly divert them from the system, offer them a host home program where they can access supports there and not have to access the shelter system. And then secondly, in the sort of prioritization process or steps that a community might take, host homes programs can provide sort of an option for youth who might have lower support needs, youth who might be more situated, like, you know, lower on a by name priority list or a prioritization list. And again, host home programs can offer an option if youth are interested for those youth within that sort of city's prioritization process. So I think, as John said, those are super, like, fly through those to give you a taste of what's in the report. But we're going to flip it over now to Mary Jane to get us into our panel discussion now. So thank you very much.
There. Thank you so much, Erika. That's wonderful, and I'm so pleased to be able to have this conversation today, especially after learning about all the evidence, what the evidence is saying about the host homes model. And it'll be great to dig into what the providers are actually doing and what they have to say about this. So I'll facilitate this conversation for about 30 minutes, and we have 3 questions. I think they're up, yes. And I'll ask each panelist to respond to each of the questions or not to, if, depending on where their comfort level is or where they want to. But first, I'll just ask each panelist to introduce themselves and their program briefly for about a minute each before we get into the questions. And yeah, please, let's start with Russ. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Russ Sanche, and I'm the executive director of an organization called the Portal Youth Outreach Association, and commonly known as the Portal, which is great. And we are what our name says, and we're a portal for young people 16 to 24 that are at risk. And homelessness has been always the highest risk factor. So we help them to connect to whatever they need. It's a relationship-based approach that we take. And so we want to hear folks' story. We want to know what they need. And we want to be very, very, open-ended in terms of what that looks like. So we're not heavy duty on, you're my client or your case file's open or anything like that. It's really about being an adult friend or caring adult in their lives. Partnerships are crucial. Can't stress that enough. And it's really what's made the difference in us scrambling and trying to do something we can't do versus together being able to do it. Because we're located in rural Nova Scotia in the Annapolis Valley, partnerships are crucial, but also very vital in terms of the youth experiencing lots of different folks to help them along the way.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that. Sandy, would you like to give us a bit of a overview of yourself and your program? Thanks.
Yeah, certainly. Hi, everyone. My name is Sandy Dietrich-Bell. I am the CEO of oneROOF Youth Services. We're located in Waterloo Region. We've been around for over 30 years, started as a drop-in center, moved into sheltering and drop-in, soon to be moving into supporting. And yeah, the host home program was a real nice fit for us.
Sound is a bit off there. Great, thank you. Now, Bonnie is also on here, but her camera is not working that well. Bonnie, would you like to go from 360 Kids and give us introduce yourself and your organization? Thanks.
Sure, thanks, Mary Jane. Sorry, yes, my video is not working. My name is Bonnie Harkness, and I'm the COO of 360 Kids. 360 Kids predominantly works with youth who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, and our goal is really to move kids from a place of crisis to stability. We tend to frame ourselves in sort of 4 different pillars per se, where we're working in housing, programs. We have many housing programs, employment programs, education, and health and wellness, and that really encapsulates all of the wraparound supports. And really, Night Stop is really on that continuum. We really look at how we meet kids where they're at and to be able to provide the right service to the right kid at the right time. And so really our push now is a lot more in the prevention side of things. And we look at our Night Stop program, which is a host home type program, but it is an accredited program coming from the UK, where we're looking at really helping to divert kids from the shelter system, but look at it from a perspective of prevention as well as early intervention. So I'll leave it there, and thank you for having me today.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. And Steve, would you like to give us the rundown of your program?
Yeah, thanks, Mary Jane. So my name is Steve Levac. I use the pronouns he and him. I identify as genderqueer. I am the manager of youth services at Halton Children's Aid Society in Ontario. So we're sort of snugged between Toronto and Hamilton, for those of you geographically want to know where we're located. My portfolio is continued care and supporting youth, which is youth transitioning from child protection between the ages of 18 to 21. And The ministry is reviewing that age right now, so it could be beyond 21, is what we're hoping for. I have the education portfolio for supporting youth involved in child welfare in our region through education, all of the youth programs that are run through the agency, and then as well, a really unique housing program that is funded separately through municipality dollars through federal agreements for funding called Bridging the Gap Halton, which is the main coordinated access point for addressing youth homelessness in Halton. And under that is our host home program.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And you know, I don't think I said anything about myself. My name is Mary Jane McKitterick. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the community planning manager with Away Home Canada. So hello, everyone. So that was wonderful. So you can see we have a diverse and geographically and in terms of program-wise, really rich rich content here coming from our folks, our panelists. So we'll dig into that. Now we have 3 questions that we have on the slide. The first question that we're asking is, now that your program has been up and running, and in some cases, I think 30 years, depending on who you are, what would you have liked to have known when you started? And I'm going to ask, I'm going to start with Sandy, and then Russ, and then Steve, and then Bonnie. And you can, you know, talk about your own, but you're also free to respond to other folks as well in terms of if that's true, if that's bringing up some ideas for you. And just thinking about some of those pitfalls maybe that you ran into, but also those drivers of success. Yeah, so just we'll start with you, with Sandy. Go ahead.
Okay. So I think some of the things that we would have liked to have known when we first started was, you know, the fact that there are myths in the community about homelessness and what it means and you know what it looks like, and even though you know Waterloo Region is a fairly progressive community with lots of people that are very accepting, it takes on a whole new meaning when you're looking at inviting someone into your home. So you know, I think, you know, in the beginning we might have put a bit more emphasis on that piece about sort of just revisiting that and not making the assumption that, you know, everybody was still as comfortable as, you know, our history has demonstrated in terms of the support that we've received. One of the other things that we wish we would have known, and, you know, it's really comes down to just day-to-day operational stuff, like what happens when a host home family wants to go on vacation? You know, where does the youth go? What if the family's not comfortable allowing the youth to stay in the home when they're away? That sort of thing. So, you know, those are some things that we had to quickly scramble and deal with on the fly. And I mean, we were quite successful in mediating those, but, you know, just things that would have been nice to have planned for. I think, you know, one of the other things that we did know was, as I've mentioned, Waterloo Region is a very receptive and welcoming community. And so we had a great deal of interest right away, and almost before we were ready for it. And so, you know, our training has really evolved over time, and we've really benefited from getting feedback from what we call our more seasoned host home families, you know, coming back to us and saying, you know, this should be involved in training, and I wish I would have known that in the beginning, that sort of thing. And so, you know, it's led us to develop what we call sharing circles, where all the families can come together and just discuss, you know, things that they've experienced, things that, you know, maybe the newer families are wanting answered, and you know, there's just more credibility coming from a more experienced family than from staff talking to them, you know. So those are all things that that have really been beneficial to us, and a couple of pitfalls that we, you know, would have benefited from having a bit more planning around.
That's incredible. I love the sharing circles. That's a great idea. Definitely great takeaway. Russ, did you have anything you wanted to add to, or would you like to talk a little bit about your own successes and pitfalls, or what you would have liked to?
Yeah, it's amazing. Sandy's in Waterloo and we're in Nova Scotia, and we had the same kind of experience. Wish we would have known this. And it was similar to what Sandy had said. We encountered stigma that was really under the radar. It wasn't obvious. And so people did have that fear. And so the first year when after we had funding, we'd done it for a while, but it was through a lot of personal connections. And I felt like I was wearing out my friends. And so really having then the opportunity for us to educate the community, and we had to really educate them, almost each community, because there's a number of small communities. And so for them to really have ownership, these are our kids, these are our nephews and nieces and daughters and sons, like that was really important for the community to grab. So that's when things changed for us. And so same experience as Sandy, I love the sharing circles. And I know that when host homes have encouraged other host homes, because some have had stellar success. And I think what made them so successful was the fact that they were very, very welcoming, really loved on the young people that stayed in their home, showed such high acceptance. And so that was definitely a contributor. One other thing I'd probably mention in terms of one of the pitfalls and the way to overcome it is really, and Sandy also made reference to that, and that's the training. Some host homes initially really had the wrong idea that they were too involved or too worried or too parental, and so needing to curb that. So we've certainly revamped a lot of our training and sort of hitting that up front and taking that pressure off, but also watching for that kind of thing through the screening process. And so those are the things I would probably share and highlight.
No, amazing. That's very interesting stuff coming up about your program as well. So Steve, would you like to follow up with any of that or talk about some of yours? I know you have some interesting ideas around like maybe what, you know, who the youth are as well in terms of that and some pitfalls or challenges around that.
Yeah, I think, you know, so I have spent since the 90s in child welfare. And really stepped into housing, 8 years ago when I came to Halton as a supervisor here. But I think, you know, it's about having, we have more youth than we do beds, for sure. So it's that security of long-term funding. And then what I wish I would have known back when I first took over the programming was that there really is a spectrum of housing that is going to be required for youth to be successful. Both within the host home program and then as well transitioning from the host home program to whether that be another type of supported housing environment or into independence. So being able to make sure that we had that spectrum of availability, which we do now, but we didn't back then. So it took a bit to build those pieces up. I think success-wise, now, I would say, we do have that wide variety of spectrum of housing that's available, and you're going to need that to manage the profile and the acuity of youth that are going to come to your programming for housing. And that most of that was, if not all of it, sort of addressed through collaboration with other community partners and understanding what that is. I think the success that I would want to highlight is that you really need, and I don't think we were great at this at the beginning, but we're much better at it now, is the inclusion of youth voices in your programming. So what is working for them and what isn't working for them, and then taking the feedback that you get from those youth and being able to implement that, especially when it comes to those youth who are marginalized in the community, right? Being able to understand the needs of our marginalized youth and how we can better adjust our programming to meet their needs as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Steve. And Bonnie, I know you're out there. I can't see.
Yes, I know. I'm so sorry. It's totally different when you're not interacting with a face there. So appreciate it. So we've had, interesting, because our Night Stop program is an accredited program that has run for 30 years in the UK, we felt very confident in bringing it to Canada that there would be very little sort of we'd have to do in terms of bringing it to the Canadian context, right? That was actually not necessarily true. So when I think about some of those things that we wish we had have known, I think it would have been that. And I'll give you a couple of examples there, and some of them I think Sandy touched on as well, is things like when people go on vacation. So in our country, we have a lot of people that in the summer months, it's very much cottage country, and everybody ups on the weekends and go to cottages. And in the UK, that's not as common. People don't, they're smaller. I mean, the UK probably can fit into Ontario, so our geography alone. So that was a challenge about how, we're very interested in ensuring that young people have really positive experiences, and being able to participate in some of those things were wonderful, but how would we manage that? How could we vet or screen a cottage, or be able to intervene if necessary if something went wrong when a cottage could be an hour or 2 hours away? So that was a challenge, and we still, not to our liking, we still always want to continue to try and problem solve these things so that kids can have those experiences, that we don't stop great things happening because just solely on risk, but we also, of course, have to manage the risk. So that's one. Pools was another one. How do we manage that? I always had this vision, like it wasn't good enough for us to say, no, they can't swim because of risk, and have these kids in the hot summer months looking out the window as the family wanted to use their pool, right? So how do we manage that piece and ensure that kids have experiences that they didn't have? I think again, I mentioned geography, so the number of hosts that we need for our geography. So we're in a unique in York region. We have both sort of urban and rural areas. So the number of hosts that we have to have in order to facilitate keeping kids in their community is much bigger. So I always call it like a party. If you want, 50 people to show up, invite 100. And that's sort of the scenario with the host family. So just making sure that we have a number of hosts in each community so that kids actually have the ability to really choose, and we give a profile so kids do have some choice. That was some of our learning as well, that around giving kids choice and allowing them to make a match that might suit them. I think one of our pitfalls was the number of staff. So when we first started, in the UK, their numbers are much lower at the number they place. And we're used to, funders being interested in the number of kids coming through, like the how many, it's more important. And really what we need to try and focus on is it's not so much the how many kids, but to what end, right? So if we're putting lots of kids through, but they're coming back to the system, is it as helpful as maybe doing less, but doing it better? So initially we started with one staff member and trying to vet volunteers, train volunteers, screen kids, place kids, support family, support kids. It was way too much for one person. And so that was, I think, a lesson learned for us, was how we could not only utilize the internal resources, but external resources to be able to make that happen here. And I would say that some of the drivers for success for us have been really some of the earned media. So because we work in homelessness and have lots of sort of, I would call, innovative programs and really broad across the spectrum, we've had opportunities to do media, and that's really sort of generated interest and I guess getting that word out to people who do have an extra room, who might be willing to consider this, especially after, because it becomes the education avenue, right? To educate people that not all homeless kids look like what we envision, what the media normally showed us, like, lying on the street, and, that these are just kids that maybe have left home because they've had family breakdown. And there's an opportunity to actually, work with that family to reintegrate them home or to help them build the skills they need. So I think the media really helped us that way. And then also, I think our accreditation, the fact that we're the only accredited, Night Stop is accredited program, so it for funders and for hosts, I think it gives that feeling of there's a level of standards, and I think that's what we're trying to do here too around host homes in general, is how do we get those standards up so that people feel confident that they're well supported when they're supporting young people. And also, I think Sandy and Russ both mentioned it, but and this came from the UK as part of the accredited program, that we do create opportunities for hosts to come together and share stories. So we have like host events and host evenings so that they can get together and be with other like-minded people and share from learnings that way. So overall, I think we've had lots of success and we've had lots of aha moments. Some we're still working through, but we're determined to ensure that every kid has the best experience possible.
That's amazing, Bonnie. Thanks so much for that. And something that I didn't mention earlier as well is folks who are watching this, please, if you have questions, you can put them in the question or in the chats, and we'll respond to them at the end. We'll have about, I think, around 10 minutes left to respond to your questions. So if this stuff is coming up for you right now, please feel free to put those in there and we'll go through them. Right. Okay, so the second question is really about relationships, and we know that relationships in all aspects of homelessness, relationships are really critical, and we're really, I think, starting to understand how important relationships with young people, relationships with families, relationships with community partners, with government are also critical. So we're really interested in, and maybe we could keep it a little bit tighter, but just for timing, but what are the relationships that you had to establish to get your host homes program into your community? And I'm thinking around like systems and sectors, the kinds of host families, funders, government, other relationships. Maybe pick one or two critical ones. And I'm going to start with Steve, and then maybe Sandy, and then Russ, and then Bonnie. If that's okay. So Steve, would you like to comment on some of the relationships that were key for you?
Thanks, Mary Jane. People are always interested in the marrying between child protection services and housing. I think Halton's programming around housing is really unique in that sense. And especially with the changes to the CYFSA in Ontario, our legislation around child protection, which increased the age of protection in 2018 up into the age of 18. And part of that legislation was asking child protection to provide accommodation. Now, the definition of what that accommodation looked like probably would have been a struggle for a lot of other child welfare agencies, but particularly for Halton, it was not, because Bridging the Gap, Halton was already housed in-house in working conjunction with child welfare and already servicing 16 to 24-year-olds. So really, we certainly have seen an increase in volume since the legislation change of referrals from our child protection colleagues in the agency. So that has been one marrying of a relationship that's pretty significant. I asked to really, I also work for Our Kids Network as a volunteer trainer in Halton, and that is really a collaboration of a number of agencies. And in that, we have a workshop called Relationships First. So for those of you that are participating today, we really ask two philosophical questions about relationship. One is, how does your agency define what a relationship is? What is a relationship in your sector with not only the people that you serve, but also the colleagues in the community that you're collaborating with? And then the second philosophical big question is, how does your agency prioritize those relationships? Because really the success of a housing program is on the basis of having, again, that spectrum of housing provided. So for example, two of the most significant ones for Bridging the Gap are our partnership with Support House in Halton, which is a mental health provider. And they as well have several housing opportunities for youth to explore that need more, say, intensive, higher acuity youth support staff outside of my program, but we collaborate and work with them around joint intensive case management. And the other one is Oasis Youth, which is a newly formed organization specifically providing housing to Black youth in Halton. So really it's about those collaborations and how you make those relationships work. Relationships should never be a referral out. A relationship should be that you're not seeing this youth as a mental health youth, a children's aid youth, or an addiction substance youth, that you're really seeing these are our community youth and how are we coming together to better serve them from a spectrum of housing.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I love the idea of, the really getting at what relationship means to your organization. I think that's a big takeaway. We can all use that one for sure. What does that mean? Sandy, would you like to have do you have some thoughts on the relationships that you've built in Kitchener-Waterloo, or?
Yeah, so we were fortunate in that, because we were already such an eclectic agency, providing for educational and employment opportunities, and, providing food, and we had a trustee program, so we had a lot of relationships already quite well established. But what was interesting for us was we really had to sort of ramp those up. And so, like, I think about our relationship with the schools. I mean, we always had relationships with with them, but the host home program meant that it had to be intensified. So, staff would be going into the schools and meeting with social workers and teachers that might be seeing youth that are, on the cusp of knowing they're going to leave their home, whether it be their choice or, feeling that their parents are going to ask them to leave, and really sort of catching those youth before they even hit the street. And so, that was a key relationship for us, was to really sort of strengthen that partnership with the schools. Other ones, included, resources that already exist in the community, because we don't need to be all things to all people, but we want to have access to all things to make sure that we're providing the best supports, right? So lots of training, not just for the young people, but for the host home families around mental health and addictions, and helping them to understand, we don't have to be always the ones that offer that training, our staff, but we can link them to the resources that are in the community and facilitate that that joining. And so, other, just sort of common community partnerships and relationships included the food bank. We wanted to make sure that host homes didn't feel too overwhelmed about, oh, how am I going to, provide for all of this? And so, making sure that they were aware, and that the young person was aware that there's food available to them, and that they can join our trustee program, which really gave the host home families a sense of comfort that the room and board was going to be paid on time. And it helped the youth to learn, how to budget properly, and they would enter into the trustee program with us, and we would help them to facilitate that. So, lots of partnerships are necessary for any program to be successful. Really, my advice to folks thinking of starting this is look at the relationships you already have, increase them, solidify them, and through them, ripple out and really connect with more and more as you go, because it really does take a village. And so, utilize all the relationships and connections that you have out there.
That's fantastic. Some real gems in there, Sandy. I'm just going to keep pushing along. We're going to get a little bit tighter for time. We have about 6 minutes left, I think, to do all of the rest. But so, Russ, I know you have lots to say about relationships.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll keep it real short. You'd swear that Steve and Sandy and I all work together in one place, because the things they're saying, I go ditto, ditto, ditto. Excellent unfolding of that. The one relationship no one touched on is that of funders. And what we discovered, and it was awesome, when we started an initiative to end youth homelessness, we invited our funders to be at the table and to strategize with us and struggle through. And so when they really saw what was already happening organically around host homes, but also other initiatives, they really owned it and then pursued it with us. And that was a big win. So I would recommend everything that Sandy and Steve said, but also get to know your funders and let them get to know you, because at the root of it, they care, and they wanted to care with us. And that's been fantastic. And the other piece, the other gem, is you might have to model relationship. And Steve, your questions are brilliant. And as we modeled relationship, we see even child welfare workers now building relationships where they wouldn't have before, and things like that. And when everyone's on the same page in terms of that, it makes a big difference.
Beautiful, wonderfully, beautifully said.
All right, Mary Jane, can I just, sorry, Russ, yeah, I would be remiss. People ask a lot when they contact about host homes about funders and where we get our funding from, and how we've been successful with that. And I think everything that Russ talked on, I mean, I would regret if I had not talked about my partnership with the region of Halton, and how important that is. So for those of you that are in communities like cities, it would be your city, like City of Hamilton, City of Toronto, who sort of manage and look after the housing and the housing support pieces. And those are really key partnerships, because without the partnership that we would have with our regional municipality, the success of Bridging the Gap Halton would not be. So that I echo Russ's stance on the funder piece, and how important that is to have that relationship, for them to know who you are, what you stand for, what your values are, and how they can best support you in your work.
Thank you. That's really critical. Yeah, and Halton is a great region. They are pretty good out there. Okay, so next, Bonnie, could you add something on relationships? I know.
I'm going to be really quick, but yeah.
Oh, sorry. I know
no,
you.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm going to be quick, but I want to say everybody said many of the things that I would say also. And Steve, it's a really good point when you talk about government support, because that's one of the things as an accredited agency that the UK requires, is that organizations that want to do the night stop and supportive lodging program have the support of the government, not necessarily financial support, but absolutely them supporting the project, because it is key. The two areas I just want to touch on really fast is, one is, again, in places where geography may be an issue, where you don't have urban centers where people can get easy transportation. Volunteer drivers was something that we feel like that's a relationship. It's another way too that people can get involved in the host homes program without actually, let's say, don't have an available space to host a young person, but they want to contribute. It's a great way for people to contribute, and it's one that we learned along the way that we really needed in order to facilitate getting kids to host families with a warm transfer. So that is one thing I would add. And the other thing, we talked a little bit about child welfare. Steve talked about that. But interesting for us, one of the things that we've had the relationship with child welfare is there's often a lot of people that come to do foster care. And once they go through the training or start the training, realize that maybe this was a little bit more than they anticipated or what they can commit to. So there's a really great partnership where we could refer, actually. So maybe we have people that want to do more than just host temporarily that could be great foster care families, and vice versa. So that relationship of sharing, and in the school boards as well, I think what was really tricky for us is we have huge numbers of teachers and facilities, and so just trying to get the information out across that network to be able to get referrals was a huge challenge, and it's key, because that's where majority of our kids are going to come from, is the school system, because that's where majority of our kids are at that age group. So that's really key too, about how do you sort of get the information, how to get the partnerships out really broad and wide in the school boards. And I'll leave it there because I know we're short on time.
Thanks. I know there's so much more to go into. Bonnie, thanks so much. Your voice was garbly. I'll just let you know. We can still hear you, but just letting you know for next. It's because we're going to go into a really like 2-3 minutes of evolving past post-COVID. Maybe we could just have. I'll start with you, Bonnie. Do you want to just give us like some quick points on, or a quick point on what you're going to be doing post-COVID and how we can go past this, because I know it had impact. So. Sure. I don't know if this is any better. It is. It's great now. Yeah, your voice is perfect. Thank you. Okay, perfect. I just took my headset off. Okay. I think for us, one of the learnings, and we were doing this prior to the pandemic hitting us, but we were looking at more diversity in our host families, or hosts in general. They don't always have to be families. They can be individuals. But we were looking at more diversity around culture and things like that, to be able to place kids in an environment where they had the same, as Erika mentioned, culture, values, things like that. What we realized in the pandemic was that many of the sort of targeted hosts that we targeted prior were people who were retired and had the availability of the spare rooms because their kids had grown and moved on, or they actually had, the time to host, let's say, and invest this way. And when the pandemic hit, that was the group of people that were most at risk. So that was a challenge for us. So what the lessons learned is, be more diverse in our hosts, so that when anything hits, we always have sort of something that meets the need. I think for us too, the other real lesson learned is around the virtual. I mean, I'm sure we've all experienced this, but the amount of information sessions that we do with the community and the training that we do, much of it can be done now virtually, which will really, I think, help improve, because the level of training that we provide is pretty large. And so the commitment for families was difficult. And I think when we've been doing it virtual, we've had more success because people can sort of log in right after work or whatever it may be, and we can split up the trainings in shorter periods of time as opposed to like full days on a Saturday. So I think that's really been a lesson learned. And then the other piece is that people are a bit more comfortable now with longer stays, which I appreciate, because sometimes, for us, moving kids around because of availability of hosts is not really the best. We prefer, if we could,
leave kids in a place where they're doing well and close to school and it's the same host. So I think that's been a bit of a success for us as well, and what we'll look for in the future.
Great. So we have about 9 minutes left. I'm going to ask the other panelists, do you have something really key that you want to share about post-COVID, or have you covered most of your stuff? Because I would love to get some questions in if that's possible. Are you okay? If you do, please share it. Sandy?
Yeah, I'd like to just say that, so our host home program was funded initially by the Trillium Foundation, and then it ended at year 3. And so when COVID hit, I mean, I've got to just give a huge shout out to the staff that weathered through that. It was such a difficult transition for them to try to support with all that going on. We were fortunate in that the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness evaluated our 3-year program. And largely because of that evaluation, you know, the region of Waterloo saw the merits in this program. And so they've picked up the funding now. And so, you know, post-COVID for us, you know, it's meant that not only has the region picked up the program, but they've recognized that, you know, it needs more staff. As Bonnie said, we began with just 2, and it was so much work for them. And then COVID hit, and, you know, it was just astronomical. So funding through the region has allowed us to have some additional staff, which is really gonna help. I think one of the key things that I wanted to mention was that I think post-COVID is gonna look different for everyone. What's post-COVID to you might not be post-COVID to the host home family.
Right.
And so we really make efforts to provide PPE.
Great, thank you. It's fantastic. That's good then. I think we're going to move on. Lindsay, would you like to share the questions with us and maybe facilitate that?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Hand off. Okay.
Thanks to everyone who has popped some comments in the chat box. There are a couple of great questions. So the first one comes from Dagma, and they're wondering about different models of payment and compensation for the host homes families. Do any of the panelists have any comments on that?
I can speak to a bit of ours. So with the Night Stop program, we provide a stipend so on the Night Stop side, on a short-term basis, there would be a daily stipend to cover off for food. So it's really a reimbursement of expense, not necessarily that it's to the reimbursement. It's about $25 a day, so it's not huge, but they're expected to provide a breakfast, a bagged lunch, and dinner, a warm meal at night. So $25 sort of to cover that, those 3 meals. Majority of our host families, to be honest with you, don't actually take it, or they don't want it. Now, we still budget for it because we don't want to eliminate anyone who's low income that might be a fantastic host and available, but they just can't afford to offset that cost. So that's what we do from Night Stop. And supportive lodging, where it's a little bit longer term, the youth would pay through, if they're, let's say, still in school, we might facilitate getting them on OW while they finish high school, and that OW payment would come to us, and then we would reimburse the family for expense.
Wonderful.
For us, we here in Nova Scotia, we work closely with community services and every young person that can't live with their parents, and we can verify that they're eligible for that. And so we base the rates, and we don't have any host home providers that ever do it for the money. That's very clear. And so we've supplemented with some subsidies, and they get $600 a month, which covers the shelter and any costs, and certainly food. And then we always access, because we have a trustee program, access those extras that are needed, whether it's stuff to pursue a job, whether it's safety gear, whether it's transportation. We just try our best to make sure that the host homes are not heavily burdened. So the staff pick up the youth and things like that, or we get child welfare to fund a driver, whatever we can do to make it that their focus is the relationship. And when we've done that, it's been great.
Great.
Yeah, I would just sorry, I would just add to what Russ has said. We're the same in Waterloo Region in terms of, we treat it as a true room and board situation. We really want the youth to learn that skill of having to budget and save and pay their bills. And so, you know, we have the trustee program, as I mentioned, and we do have a bit of a slush fund if the youth ever doesn't quite make the appropriate payment. But we really encourage the youth to be the one that the money is exchanged through. They use their OW or their part-time jobs, and we treat it very
great. Okay, so we have lots of great questions. There's a couple of questions about the appropriateness of the host homes model for different types of youth, so youth who are victims of human trafficking, youth with pets. So I just wanted to put that out there. But there's one question that I think is probably really relevant to most people on the call that I want to get to, and it is, what has been the most effective method of recruiting hosts for your programs? And I'll put that out
So
to
I'll just, I'll take a quick, I'll try to be as quick as I can. One, recruitment wise, was actually through faith-based groups and faith-based leaders was one. People who come from a faith background, often wanting to give back. And the second piece was because we are housed in a child welfare agency, there are lots of inquiries that come in from the community around foster care and being foster parents. Sometimes candidates will get into the training and assessment of that process and find out that it's a bit too much for them. So we've formulated an agreement with our resource and foster parent recruiters to, when they have those great homes that are kind of maybe stepping away that they were hopeful about, we step in to say, hey, you know, there's bridging the gap as well in this host home program. Here's what we have in comparison to what your slideshow did at the beginning when you compared the foster care versus host home program. And we use that as a means to do some recruitment, and we've had some pretty good success with that.
And for us, it's everything that Steve said, and then the one other component that I would add is having a bit of a speakers bureau from experienced host home providers, and letting them be the ones that, you know, go to these groups and make presentations and speak from experience about, you know, what it's like to be a host home family. And I think that really resonates with folks to hear it right from people who are doing the work.
And for us at 360 Kids, the two other things, all the other things that we are doing as well, and I would add that community events, so like Rib Fests and things like that, we are always at booths where there's lots of community coming through to talk about what it is, what we do. And again, the media piece where we can get it out any which way in the media, whether it's in blogs or posts, just to talk about the program, to get people's interest in social media.
And I would just say one more thing, and that's knowing who you're talking to and connecting the story with the need, and then just inviting more conversation and more dialogue. And certainly the media stuff's help, but when you're telling good stories and you're telling people how really safe it is and how it's not what they're thinking, and then what I think we need to move into is creating avenues in our communities where there's greater context of early relationships and early connections, because you've got young people who don't trust adults and adults who don't know what these kids are all about. And so if we can create safer places just in the community where relationships and bridging that is normal, that's going to help both parties to say, hey, you're just like my nephew. I could have you in my home. And that's what I would add to that.
Great. Thank you so much, panelists. We're at the hour, it's 1 o'clock. And there were a couple of other great questions. And so folks, if we didn't get to your question, the email addresses of the panelists are up here on the PowerPoint slide. So if you want to connect with any of the panelists afterwards, feel free to email them with your questions. Thank you to everyone who joined us here. And thanks again to Mary Jane for moderating, and for all of our panelists for being here today. It was recorded, so we'll send the recording to everyone. And yeah, if anyone has any final words, I'll hand it over to you. Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone.
Take care, everyone.